Hello and welcome. You're watching Business Plus. I'm Shweta Kothari. We're bringing you stories from the world of business, policy and economy. As we wrap up the year, we're bringing you all the top movers and shakers in India as well as globally. But back home in India, startups that made all the noise for the right or the wrong reason. To begin with, BYJU'S Krishna Kumar, Karthik Malhotra here with me in the studios. Krishna, BYJU'S is the story to talk about for all the right and maybe mostly wrong reasons, come to think of it. Things that it did well, it feels like it's been a while now that it's been not doing too well, either financially or when it comes to corporate governance or when it comes to its employees. But let's go with each of these one after the other. BYJU'S has been in the news for a lot of changes that happened at the management level solely on the back of the fact that their financials are still not looking very good. It's the end of 2023.
Right. It all began, I think, roughly when they acquired Akash, the coaching giant Akash in 2021. And roughly from then on, if you take a look at the BYJU'S story, it has seen the rise. It's a classic case of the rise and fall of a giant. Once upon a time referred to as an edtech giant, not referred to as an edtech giant anymore, because right now all the talk is about the glorious fall of BYJU'S, to the point where at the end of the year in December, Byjus Ravindran, the founder or the co-founder, had to pledge his own home to pay salaries. So that's where it ended. But what transpired in between is incredible, both in terms of people's awareness about what edtech as a product is, and in terms of also the startups and their own attitude towards building valuations more than building consumer and customer trust. And BYJU'S being a classic case of it as well. So from then on, if you take a look at it, a startup that was valued at once upon a time what is called as a decacorn, because it was valued at over $20 billion, $22 billion was how high the valuations one touched, and then it kept getting cut down and down and down to single digits to the lowest possible levels. The fall of BYJU'S tells two stories. One is what is the potential of edtech in a country like India and how it changed from the pandemic world to the post-pandemic world. That was one story. And the other is how startups and startups' attitude towards building businesses, both. Because they say, the best of the startups in the country, say for a startup like, say, MakeMyTrip.com or something like that, they did the process of building it, scaling it up, considering all factors, considering people involved, considering the employees, considering the consumers. So BYJU'S, that's where the questions started being asked about, how did BYJU'S scale up so quickly based on that one simple idea at that stage that everybody's going to sit at home and give education to their children in front of a computer screen. From then on, you have all the global investors through the course of the year cutting down their valuations. One of the famous ones being the Dutch, Netherlands-based investor Proces, first slashing valuations down to about $5 billion based on the stake it has in BYJU'S. And then we saw one issue or the other, one litigation or the other, all the mass layoffs, and of course the famous videos of employees within BYJU'S asking questions to their supervisors and not getting any answers, that going viral. So it had issues with every single stakeholder concerned, from the investors into the company, to the employees of the company, and of course, finally, the customers of the company.
All right, let's go to the start of it. Where did it all start? I think some can date it back to before pandemic, which is when BYJU'S was at the height of its glory. We had an edtech giant, an India company indigenously made popular for rolling out courses that people in India most wanted. The story of Byjus Ravindran is both fascinating and questionable at the same time. At the height of pandemic, I think it was golden glory days for BYJU'S, where it saw its revenues shoot up. But goes away pandemic in 2022 and reality kicks in, and since then it hasn't been very well.
You're right. Obviously the pandemic, the fact that children were at home, parents were at home, schools were shut, education had to continue, edtech was the answer. And that answer came on the first tick. The answer that arrived for everybody was called BYJU'S. Now, what all did BYJU'S do? Obviously, it wasn't just BYJU'S that grew. Of course, BYJU'S grew the most. At 22.5 billion, it was the most valued Indian startup ever. Obviously, among the entire edtech pack also, it was the most valued edtech, right? But you also had Vedantu and Unacademy, PhysicsWala, so many of these startups mushroomed trying to get a piece of this, we thought, ever enlarging pie, but then we realized that the pandemic was thankfully short-lived. Now, with the pandemic receding, people taking their children back to school, schools reopening, this whole format of distance learning, computer-driven learning, edtech as a business proposition started attracting question marks. Now, in this whole course of becoming the largest Indian startup, what all did Byju's do? Krishna spoke, of course, about Akash, and Akash was this traditional tuition center, right, coaching center for engineering students. Now, after the takeover of Akash, or around the same time, there were multiple other acquisitions also that Byju's was making. One among them was called Epic. The other one was called Great Learning. Now, while there was valuation, now what is valuation? Valuation is an investor coming in, buying a stake in your company for a certain value. But at some point, Byju Ravindran realized that perhaps let's not part with equity anymore. Let's continue to grow, but leverage ourselves and take a debt. And that became, I think, the first grave mistake. There was nothing wrong with growth, but then this leveraged growth, taking a loan of as high as $1.2 billion and then not being able to pay that loan back. That, I think, became the first nail in the coffin, if we can call it yet, for Byju's. Now, obviously, one thing led to another. Now, there are multiple battles that Byju's is facing right now. The topmost among them, and there's a priority list in early December, Byju Ravindran had chalked out this priority list, 5 areas that he really wants to tackle immediately. One among them, the topmost among them, are the FEMA charges, the exchange management and violations of India's foreign exchange management rules is the first and the foremost challenge that Byju Ravindran needs to tackle, because ED has gone after Byju's and accusing Byju's of not keeping up with the laws of exchange management. So that is the first challenge that Byju Ravindran has to tackle. The second one, of course, is repayment of this $1.2 billion loan. Now, this $1.2 billion loan will be paid perhaps in part by selling the platforms Epic and Great Learning, which were bought using that loan in the first place. But now it's a distress sale, so he's not attracting the same value for those platforms as what he bought them for 1.5 years, 2 years ago. So this is the second challenge he's faced with. The third challenge is really the financial reporting. So the financial reporting has not yet happened for FY23, and end December, we are at the end of December, right? And end December is when Byju Ravindran is slated to, or Byju's, the company, is slated to release its FY23 audited books. FY22 books came out in the month of November, first week of November, much delayed, 1.5 years too late. But when we saw,
by that time, the official auditor of the group, Deloitte, had quit and left the picture.
Exactly.
That's how bad things were.
Absolutely. And BDO came in as the new auditor. But so FY22 saw, while there was an exponential growth, 2.3x growth in revenue, losses had narrowed, but we were still looking at losses. The path to profitability was nowhere on the horizon. And FY22 is actually April 2021 to 31st March 2022. 2021, April to July, August, traces of the pandemic were still there. Complete reopening of the economy of the country, while in most parts it had reopened, but people had not ditched the online model completely. So to my limited, revenues grew and profit and losses narrowed. But my fear is that FY23 numbers are actually going to be devastating for Byju's, because April 2022 to 31st March 2023, nobody has pretty much spoken about the COVID-19 pandemic. And online education was completely ditched.
Kids are back to school, people are back to colleges. So perhaps the story of edtech giants or edtech space seems flagelling at the moment.
Totally. So coming back to the priority areas for Byju Ravindran, the last in his 5 top priority list, the 5th one is actually at a corporate level, drawing a path to profitability. So it's pretty clear that profits are still elusive for Byju's. It is still, and growth, what we saw in FY22 is unlikely, that number is unlikely to make it to the books of FY23. And the problems began in FY23, which are now, and we are in FY24 right now, which are really going to get magnified, blown out of proportion for the books of the company in FY24. So it is obviously a very, very grim picture for Byju Ravindran. Now, obviously, he has been unable to pay salaries for the month of November, for which his own house, in fact, 2 of his own houses were put on the block and they were mortgaged, and he had taken a loan to pay those salaries. Yeah, I mean, and he's sort of, you know, he's considering himself as this warrior right now, battling multiple wars at multiple ends, 5 of those wars definitely that we spoke about, but really feeling like a war leader right now, wanting to emerge. Now, what also happened in the midst of all this was a complete board rejig. What also happened in the process of all this was Ranjan Pai coming back to the rescue of Byju Ravindran and paying another $600 million of loan that had been taken from Davidson Kempner. So there are these little, you know, knights coming in their armors to the rescue of Byju Ravindran. Byju Ravindran feeling like a war leader right now.
And of course, the sale of Epic and Great Learnings, the acquisitions that didn't make sense at the beginning, it came a full circle by the end of the year, where it's probably will raise about $400 million selling Epic alone.
Yeah, that's right. So I think all of these will go towards problem number 2, which is repayment of that loan. Problem number 1, which is FEMA violations. He's already said that, you know, we've completely complied. There has been no problem, etc. But the problem is the path to profitability, and that seems to be one reason that. What do investors want at the end of the day? To begin with, investors want you to grow like no tomorrow. Byju's has delivered that for the investors. In stage 2, investors want returns, either by selling their equity to somebody else who's out there to buy it, which seems unlikely right now for Byju's, given all the corporate misgovernance in the company, and the path to profitability still being elusive. So the second thing that investors want are returns on their investment by way of the company making profits, and dividends, which are shared by all shareholders, and the bigger ones, including Prosus for that matter, not finding any merit in keeping a $22 billion asset on its books, reducing it to $8 billion first, 5.5 billion, and now it is at under $3 billion.
$3 billion. So path to profitability, perhaps that is what Byju's will be eyeing. But it's not just Byju's, come to think of it. There are other startups that are dwindling when it comes to financials and what is coming by the way of revenues. We're talking about startups, companies, people that did or did not do very well, people who made news, movers and shakers of 2023. And when it comes to movers and shakers, startup community has witnessed a lot of turbulent time. There has been realization when it comes to profit, but not so much when it comes to quick delivery apps, specifically for Dunzo. Dunzo, a very famous, relatively in south of India, service that allows you to, move a good from one place to another without physical interference of an actual person who wants to deliver. So Dunzo saw a merit in coming out with a service that allows you to move things. A quick service platform was later expanded to north of India, here in Delhi, various other parts of north of India. Suddenly, in the middle of 2023, looked like they're not doing too well because they were letting go of people, and there was no realization when it came to profit, perhaps some sort of a hit on bottom line immediately after pandemic. So another story there that is not doing too well after pandemic sort of started fading away.
So I think, the bottom line was always red. So, there's no surprise there. And that is, of course, the case with most startups. And since we are talking startups, I think, correct, Dunzo stands out as one of those companies, yet another one of those companies that did not really make it, to good news in 2023. Now remember, of course, it was a company, it started in Bangalore. It was a company where a rider could go to a location, pick up something for you, buy it for you, or pick it up from somebody else and deliver it to you. And then it expanded across the country, including Delhi NCR. Now, who are the real investors that we are talking about in Dunzo? We are talking about Google and we are talking about Reliance, right? Two big, gigantic investors, one global big tech behemoth called Google and, of course, India's largest company called Reliance. And these two together owning almost half of the company. But we'll come to the challenges there subsequently. What was the real problem? I think 2022 onwards, we also saw that this whole business model of quick delivery started coming into question. Quick commerce, as it is referred to. So it started with Grofers, which is now called Blinkit and has since been picked up by Zomato as one of its subsidiary companies. But when Grofers started with this 9-minute delivery, if I'm not mistaken, it was a disruption, right?
Revolution.
And this is something that really, for the right or the wrong reasons, got everybody to get up and take notice that it's difficult for you to fathom that you click or you make your payment after creating your cart on an app and 9 minutes later your doorbell rings. It was unimaginable prior to 2022. But this entire fight in quick commerce got boiled down to who can deliver your items quicker, right? Now, coming to who are the players in this market, you had Grofers being bought by Zomato, changed to Blinkit. You had Swiggy starting its own quick delivery service called Instamart. And you also had another player called Zepto and Dunzo, which had just become from a delivery app to a quick commerce app, finding its feet by way of expansion across the country. So, very basic, obvious sort of reasoning tells you that the space is ripe for consolidation. And when it comes to consolidation, you will have perhaps 2 or 3 big players surviving, and anybody else who's unable to scale at that rate, who's unable to acquire customers at that rate and have a clearer path to profitability is not going to make it. And Dunzo seems to be the one quick commerce company in India right now who is unable to make money. Now, as a result of this, there were issues all of 2023 about delayed payments, salaries not being credited to employees' accounts. Dunzo coming out with statements saying that our delivery riders are paid because they are gig workers and they are not linked to a salary. It's the corporate employees who haven't received salary, etc. But in all of this, the idea was for Dunzo to raise more money. And to raise money, it was looking back at its 2 biggest investors, being Google and Reliance. And multiple talks of another fundraise round have actually not resulted in anything fruitful yet for Dunzo. And any new investment coming into an already sort of, falling through the cracks sort of a quick commerce player, is not good news for the company.
Absolutely, not very good news. And I remember at the peak of pandemic, Karthik, and I was in Bangalore and Dunzo wasn't really available in Delhi at that point in time. Dunzo did allow me to buy quite a few items that you wouldn't be able to go out and buy yourself owing to pandemic restrictions. And the company seemed to be doing really well back then. So as I said, another company that took a beating immediately after things started turning around. People could go out, perhaps no more needed that quick service delivery, and hence why Dunzo could not make it. But then there is another startup which did make it, which is Zepto, Krishna.
Right. The question as far as quick commerce business has always been about unit economics. Now, unit economics has been the problem. Whether do you make money per delivery? This is the cost of delivering 8 and 9 minutes, whatever be the item that you're delivering. What about the cost to incur and how much do you charge? That question, Shweta, if you ask me, be it Zepto or be it Dunzo, I don't think that question is yet to be answered by everybody, because the dominant platforms, say like Swiggy, Instamart, Instamart is still very much an umbrella, under the umbrella, the entire, the Swiggy as a company. So, it's very difficult to figure out whether Instamart alone makes money or not, because Swiggy is yet to put out money, data of whether Swiggy, Instamart on its own is profitable or not. And then again, there are questions about Blinkit again. We don't know whether Blinkit is profitable. Do we know Zomato is profitable? Yes, it's a listed company. In fact, became a multi-bagger of a stock this year. So that is the case. So if you ask me at this stage, just the questions over quick commerce delivery and the value in terms of its unit economics, the questions over its unit economics is yet to be answered.
But see, it looks like Zepto seemed to have answered that question. A 14-fold growth in this financial year, the last financial year, 2023, becoming a $1 billion company. It looks like Zepto did something right that perhaps other competitors did not.
So, Shweta, I think, unicorn is a misnomer in the context of unit economics.
Yes.
It's a function of what you're valued at, and your valuation is derived by investors on the basis of future cash flows coming into the company. So, Are there cash flows at present? Yes, cash is circulating. Is that cash going into the green or the red territory is what the question on unit economics really is. So you could be a $1 billion company. We were discussing Byjus sometime back. Byjus was a $22 billion company but making losses. Right. So path to profitability and being a unicorn are actually both, if you ask me, there's no
mutually exclusive.
There's no correlation between them.
Mutually exclusive, if you ask me. And that's been proven again. If you were to sum up the India startup picture, even when global investors are extremely bullish about a startup idea that is created in India and is being experimented, and they can place huge bets because they're also looking at the macroeconomic picture of India, the demographic dividend of India, the purchasing power capabilities of Indians and the rising middle class. All of it points to the fact that a global investor should ideally invest in an Indian startup, especially if it is marketing itself to the Indian consumer, which is 1.4 billion people, and etc., etc. So global investors look at those macros and are bullish about any Indian startup. The only question is there enough proof in the pudding when it comes to a particular company? Is that making profits, or will it make profits anytime soon?
All right. So from edtech to quick commerce to then let's move on to another sector, which is the fintech space. A company that was doing extremely well at the start of the year did wind up its operations in 2023. I'm talking about Zest Money. Zest Money said, and the founders who resigned said, we do not have enough clarity on the regulatory framework. Is that the case with other fintech companies as well?
I mean, see,
really.
Zest Money is definitely one of the early victims of RBI tightening its noose around making unsecured loans harder to get, right? There are more BNPL, buy now, pay later companies, but not too many which only do BNPL standalone. So you have a lot of fintech players, and these fintech players are fairly diverse in their offerings. If you ask me, honestly, even Paytm is a fintech player, but BNPL is only a part of its business. And even as we speak right now, Paytm is throttling back on its BNPL and sub 50,000 rupee personal loan category and wants to go after the more secure seeker of loans or a more secure borrower who will borrow, after all, KYC compliance, 2 lakh rupees and upwards, right? And the fact that Paytm is not really a BFSI company or not an NBFC. So it is actually borrowing money from an NBFC and giving it to a customer on its own platform. So if anything, it's an aggregator. But coming back to Zest Money really specialized in this BNPL category. And just a few months ago, Shweta, we are in the end of December right now. I think in the month of August, September, there were talks of PhonePe, which was founded by Flipkart, which is now owned by Walmart, wanting to buy Zest Money and wanting to acquire a large enough stake in Zest Money, when PhonePe wanted to actually go the Paytm way of distributing loans, unsecured small ticket size loans to customers. But as soon as we realized that the RBI is tightening the noose around unsecured loans, PhonePe withdrew from that particular negotiation and did not want to invest in Zest Money anymore. And Zest Money, obviously feeling the heat of the BNPL criticism all around, and then the regulations tightening around BNPL, realizing that it will have to let go of its employees. So in a statement that came out early December, the CEO of Zest Money said that by end of the year, and we are at the fag end of the year right now, it would be winding up its operations and it would actually be shutting shop, and has told employees, I think there are 300 of them left, to find new jobs within the month of December. But around the mid of December, another little story emerged by another credit company called Credit PI, which in an open letter told Zest Money's founders that they are willing for a handshake, and if required, they could merge the two entities and go ahead and give a new sort of identity under the Credit PI brand to Zest Money, because Zest Money has the infrastructure, has the employees, has some customers, and just the fact that regulations and a large sale to a large player in the fintech space did not go through should not be reason enough for it to wind down its operations. So Credit PI is the emerging story. I don't think we are just a few days away from the year closing, so it may not happen right now, But yeah, I mean, even if it takes another couple of months and it does allow Zest Money to go ahead and get a new identity for itself and find employment for its employees, it's a good deal.
All I can tell you is that sounds like a light at the end of the tunnel. Let's just hope that it's not an oncoming train as far as Zest Money is concerned.
And before we move from the fintech space, since you briefly touched on RBI tightening news around unpaid secured loans and unsecured credit access to people, is that likely to have an impact in 2024 on fintech players? Is that what you're foreseeing or reading at the moment?
I mean, see, it is definitely not going to be a lucrative category for banks, for NBFCs, as well as for fintech players, simply because the amount of capital they will have to keep aside for these unsecured loans is going to go up by about 25%. So that is one part of the story. The other part of the story, in any case, is the pressure on the books of banks and NBFCs being clean. And that is something that RBI wants at all costs, because we've seen the NPA mess that has been created, in the last many years in India, which is now beginning hopefully to clean up over time. Though we saw, I think, in a parliamentary question answer round, in the winter session of the parliament, that 10 lakh crore or so is still the amount of NPAs on the books of Indian banks. But that notwithstanding, it was a lucrative category for fintech players because they had the customers, and they could negotiate on the basis of that large mass of customers with NBFCs to get a better rate of interest. So eventually it was fintech players borrowing money from NBFCs at a lower than market rate interest rate and pass it on to their customers, and making that interest swap delta in between as income to themselves. But we are seeing Paytm going away from it. We are seeing the PhonePe acquisition of Zest Money not happening, so PhonePe not wanting to get into that sector. So overall, this whole category of buy now, pay later is going to be a big question mark for 2024.
And especially with all those reports of the harassment of customers who've taken loans, who are unable to pay back the installments of the loans, coming up on social media. So much concerns regarding, and some people even taking their lives based on the fact that they're ashamed of the fact that they're not able to catch these loans, and some of these companies which give these loans are intent on embarrassing them. So it becomes a huge social menace as well.
Absolutely.
These loan companies operating in an unregulated way.
It's going to be more difficult perhaps for customers, consumers come 2024 to perhaps get small ticket size loans, because that is what is going to take a beating. But before we close this bulletin, in fact, a very good story that is emerging by the way of food delivery apps. We can't not talk about Zomato. Now, we don't know whether profit was in the books or in reality, but there was profit, and that profit, it appears, seemed to have turned around Zomato's fortunes in the 2023.
So 2 quarters of profits. I think the first quarter Q1 profitability came on account of something to do with taxes, etc., something in the books. I don't remember really what. It was a complex story. Paper profits, yeah. But the second quarter and profits coming out in the second quarter, obviously, one ray of hope in this whole question mark on aggregators, food delivery aggregators, quick commerce delivery platforms, etc. So yeah, the fact that Zomato has turned profitable is something that does well for the entire industry. In fact, now that Zomato is a listed company, has been a listed company for about 2.5 years now, it has also become a multi-bagger. And the fact that it has returned good value back to shareholders just paints a very, very beautiful picture for startups wanting to go the listing way, for startups wanting to open their books to scrutiny, for startups not trying to hide or brush things under the carpet because by virtue of being unlisted. I think in all of those, Zomato has been able to tick the right boxes. Now, the fact is that while the food delivery business has become profitable, I'm not sure if the Grofers Blinkit acquisition has turned profitable yet, but I'll have to sort of, check back on that. But that notwithstanding, I think it is good news for a company like Swiggy as well. And Swiggy and Zomato compete neck to neck. Absolutely. So it's good news for Swiggy, and the fact that Swiggy was also one of the companies whose values was underwritten in the books of investors, including Prosus. Though there wasn't a down round, it's not that Swiggy raised money at a lower valuation, but because the value was written down, partly owing to the funding winter in any case in the world, I think all of that would be left behind in 2023, and there should be better days ahead in 2024.
All right, and before we close this bulletin, Krishna, last word, funding winter, has it gone away? Are the traces of funding winter still to be felt, heard, or winter thawing finally?
If you ask some of the people out there, from some people in the startup ecosystem, investors and others, they'll tell you, when was this winter? What do you mean by winter? The right companies with the right ideas and the right business fundamentals were always getting funding. It was just not the kind of madness that we saw a couple of years before, but just about you just come up with an idea, and based on a one-line idea, people were getting billions of dollars in funding. So if you honestly ask me, there is actually a question mark of whether there was a funding winter. Yes, the overall numbers might seem down, but at the end of the day, the right companies got the kind of money that they wanted.
All right, and that is as far as India's startup community is concerned. We do know now that pandemic is behind us. The companies were banking on their growth and success during pandemic cannot do so anymore. But funding winter, as my colleagues pointing out, never existed perhaps, but seems like is finally thawing when it comes to many of these companies reviving their fortunes. 2024 would be interesting to watch out for. But with that, it's a wrap on this bulletin. Thank you for watching.